We spent the past 3 sessions looking at the theory behind chord progressions, and what we've done is we've examined the most popular techniques that are used to create chord progressions. But as you've no doubt seen, even if we do inject some surprise weaker chords into a progression, it doesn't necessarily make for a great progression, and it's actually innovative thinking that differentiates a good progression from a great one. Basically what this means is if we want to make a great sounding progression, we have to do more than just follow theories and statements. We have to go that step further. We have to be more innovative on how we work with our chords and the notes that go to make up those chords. Now, before we move on here, as I mentioned in the last session, you're all individual and you're all going to have your own different creative ideas, and you can't possibly expect me to replace that with a DVD tutorial. So for this session, what I'm basically going to do is talk you through some examples of inventive thinking that's been used by dance musicians and it's been used in the past. So feel free to use these ideas, but more importantly, adapt on them and see what happens, see how it changes everything sonically. As I've always said, the heart and soul of music is down to your individuality, it's down to your creativity. Now, one of the easiest ways we can influence the sound of any progression is by creating what's known as a chord inversion. Now, I bet some of you watching this thought I've forgotten about these. I just wanted to find the right place to talk about them. Basically, inversions are useful if you want to add some difference to a progression, but you also want to remain in pretty close proximity to the original chord. A good example on the use of an inversion would be to break up a progression that's based entirely around strong movements without having to move to a weaker chord. Or another reason is that you want to work with a pedal tone bass. Basically, all that is a bass line that plays either the dominant or the tonic notes of each chord. A good example of this is the trance offbeat bass. I'm sure you all know the one. You know, it stays at one key, doesn't it? And then it moves up to the next key and the next bar, and then moves up another key in the next bar. That sort of thing. That's a pedal tone bass, and you can use inversions to make the chords sound a little bit different from the bass. Now, inversions come basically in 2 flavours. We have a first inversion and a second inversion. And on its most basic level, I suppose the inversion is just a way of saying we're going into the chord and we're going to play around with the order of the notes. So a first inversion is created by taking the root note of your chord and moving it an octave higher. I'll show you an example here actually. What I'll do is we'll put a chord in at C. In fact, what we'll do is we'll write a bit of a progression here and I'll show you. C, and then we'll go to F. Oh. C to F. And we'll go to G. And then we'll go. Right, now if I play that back now. Well, it's alright, it sounds a bit boring though. So what we can do is we can put an inversion in this. What we'll do is we'll move these over. And I mean, basically we could use this chord here, it doesn't really matter. We'll copy this one over. Now to invert this chord, all we do, the first inversion, we just take this bottom note here, the F, and move it to an F octave higher. That's it. That's a first inversion. And listen to how that changes the sound. Now we can go further than this. What we can do is we can say, well, let's introduce a second inversion. And all we do for a second inversion is we'll take this note here, and probably no surprise, we take that an octave higher, and that's a second inversion. So let's listen to this now. Now, as you heard there, they can be a good way of introducing some interest into what's basically their fairly bog standard progression that we based entirely on strong movements. And what it basically does is it keeps the sonic signature of the original chord, but it also makes it sound slightly different to add that bit of interest. Now, the thing is, when you use inversions, as you probably heard there, it does weaken the chord. A first inversion is slightly weaker, a second inversion is even weaker. So generally you use these as replacements for weaker chords. You wouldn't move to a first inversion, then move to a weaker chord, and then move to a second inversion, then move to a weaker chord, because it would sound like you're ambling there, the harmony's ambling. You generally go strong, strong, inversion, strong, and if you wanted to go weak, you go weak after that. Now, because of that, you shouldn't really end a progression, obviously, on an inversion. When you're ending your progression, try and remain with your dominant to your tonic. Now, the next technique I want to introduce you to is called sevenths. We've already covered sevenths in our second or third session. I haven't edited this DVD yet, so I'm not sure what session it's going to be yet. But basically, what it involves is you have a chord progression consisting of triads, and all you do is turn a couple of those chords into sevenths. Now, you already know you can turn a chord into a seventh by simply adding an additional note on the seventh interval. Now, typically, you'll find it's the major chords that sound the best with an additional seventh, but in particularly, it's the V, the dominant in both major and minor keys that tends to sound really well when you add that additional seventh to it. And that's because when we add an additional note and make the dominant chord a seventh, we end up creating what's known as a dominant function. And basically what that means is that we make the dominant note stronger, and it increases that feeling, that urge that it wants to return to the tonic. Now, while you could return to the tonic after this dominant function, in my opinion, it's a bit of a waste, and you can add a surprise to the listeners by making them think you're going to return to the tonic, but actually you move on to other chords before then returning to the tonic. I'll show you that with an example, actually. What we'll do is get rid of all those for now. We'll go C, E, we'll go F, A, C, G, D. I think we'll go area. We'll go A. Go down there. Then I think we'll go back to that. We'll return to that chord. Then we'll jump to that chord, and then we'll cadense to that chord. Oops. Take that down a little bit. Running out of mouse mat there. Right, so let's have a listen to that first. Now, the simplest thing to do here was say, well, let's add the seventh to this note here. There. Get a bit confused. I can't remember working in major and minor key now. Yeah, that's our seventh there on that chord. Now, did you hear the power that gave that dominant there? It created a stronger union between those two. Now, it's wasted there in my opinion, because what we can do, we can put it there instead. And I've listened to this now. You hear it there. That was so strong. You were just so expecting it to return to that tonic there, but it doesn't do that. It carries on. I'll just play it back again. Now, of course, that's only a suggestion. I mean, it's up to you. You could place your seventh there. You could place it on this one or on that one. You place it wherever you want, but I always find it works well on the dominant there. It leads listeners into thinking, oh, this is it now, we're going to cadense here, and you don't, you carry on. And I just find it adds a bit of excitement, but as always, it's up to you to experiment and see what you think sounds best. Now, another way we can add interest to a chord progression is to use something called suspension or suspended chords. Now, when we speak about suspended chords, there's generally two, the suspended fourth and the suspended ninth, and these are actually written as sus4 and sus9. Now, we've actually already discussed the sus4 in earlier sessions, but I didn't exactly call it that. If you recall, I said that if you augment the third interval of a minor chord, you'll turn it into a major, and well, basically, that's what a sus4 is. You're simply taking the bottom interval, now remember that's the third interval of the chord, and augmenting it. Now, if you do this on a minor chord, you'll turn it into a major chord, but generally, when you want to create a suspended fourth, you tend to apply it to the tonic and the dominant chords. So what we'll do is we'll do that again here. I'll just remove our seventh there too. So all we do basically is our dominant chord there, we augment it, augment that, and we'll augment that. Now they're suspended fourth chords now. So let's listen back to that. Did you hear that? When we suspend it, it creates a really tense sounding chord. You can hear the tension in these chords. If I just play it back, listen to how the tension rises when we hit these suspended fourths. It's just such a relief there to hear that one coming after the tension created by those two. Now, when you suspend a chord in that way, you've got to give it some release eventually, because the tension, you can't keep building tension and tension because your music's going to end up sounding well wrong. So you build your tension, then release it as soon as you can. I mean, you can carry it over two chords, perhaps over three, but don't drag this tension, this suspension out for too long. Otherwise, your music will just start to sound too tense and it'll start to put people off. Now, just to mention here that the reason these are called suspended fourths is because basically you're taking the third interval and moving it to the fourth, so it's called suspended fourth. So I'll just move those back for now. Now, the second suspension I mentioned is the suspended 9 or the sus9, and basically that's created by augmenting the root note of the chord. So if we do this again now to say, we'll suspend this root note here, the dominance, we'll go to the dominance and we'll suspend the root note of the dominance and the root note of the tonic there, and just have a listen to this. Now, as you could hear there, I mean, in my opinion, suspended 9s don't sound as well as suspended 4s, but suspended 9s can be used to add a little bit of tension. Not as much tension as a suspended 4s, but a little bit of tension into your chord progression. So if you don't want too much tension, put a sus9 in. You want a bit more tension than that, put a sus4 in. Now, the next technique I want to introduce you to is well, it's actually quite a complex one, but if it's used carefully, it can produce really interesting variations on chord structures. And basically, it's a technique that they call secondary dominants. Now, to understand what these are and how we use them, we need to revisit the dominant chord. Now, seriously hope I've drilled this into you by now, but the relationship between the dominant and the tonic is an incredibly important one in music. It creates our sense of resolve, and the reason it does that is because the dominant contains that leading tone. Basically, the 7th note of your scale forms that bottom interval of your dominant chord, and this creates that sense of tension, something that we want resolved by the return of the tonic. Now, if you think about that on a very basic level, with some slight modification to notes, we could basically create this exact same feeling in other chords, and that's the principle that secondary dominants are based on. Now, what I'm going to show you an example, so let's just clear that there. Now, let's consider the first minor chord in the C major scale. Now, that's going to be the 2 chord. The second chord in the scale consists of the notes D, F, A. So I'll put them in now. I'll just put in a C before it. So there we've got the first note in our scale, which is the C, and that's a major chord, and that's followed by the D. Now, we basically know that this chord here is a minor chord because this bottom interval, this 3rd interval here, is a minor 3rd, and we know that because we have to reference this chord. Even though it's in C major, we have to reference this chord by its root note, which is a D. Now, if we just call the D major scale here, you can see there that D major scales contains the note F sharp, not the F here, and because of that, it produces a minor chord when we're working in C major. But for a moment, let's say what we're going to do is we're going to forget that theory. I mean, it's only a theory after all, and we couldn't care less about it. So what we're going to do is we're going to augment this. We're going to move it up by a semitone, and in effect, what that's going to do, this is going to turn this D minor into a D major chord. Now, when this is inserted into a chord progression, in a C major chord progression, when we hit the D, our ears are going to prick up. I'll show you by an example here. I won't put that one there. I'll move that one to there. And this one will go for an A. And then I think there we'll move back to our C, E, G. Now, I mean, that's a fairly simple chord progression there. And basically what we've done, as you can see there, we've got our D there, and we've turned our D from a minor into a major. Now, this major doesn't belong in this scale, but let's just play that back and have a listen now. Suddenly your ears will pick up on that. Now, basically, what we've done there is with those two, we've emulated the movement from dominant to tonic. Even though that isn't a dominant chord in the C major scale, we turn that into a major, and that makes it sound like a dominant. So we're moving dominant, dominant, tonic. Now, just that there creates an incredibly interesting progression. It makes our ears prick up and listen that little bit more because we're not quite sure what's going on there. Obviously, you can create a secondary dominant chord from any minor key in your scale by simply augmenting the bottom interval. But if you do this often in a chord progression, you're going to have to resolve it fairly quickly. Otherwise, the progression can come across as a bit tense and a bit tight. So you can carry on without resolve if you want to, but you will find that 8 times out of 10, you'll find it best if you do resolve it with the next chord. The decision's up to you, and you need your ears to decide for you. But if you listen to that, you can hear the difference in now. What I'll do is I'll move that down, actually. I'll say, listen to that, and then I'll augment it and we'll listen to it again. By simply augmenting that and turning that into a major. makes a massive difference to the chord progression itself. Now, a final technique I want to discuss here is one called key modulation, and we have seen this very quickly in the previous session, and basically it's changing the key partway through your music. Now, changing key through the music is quite popular in some genres of dance, such as trance, trip hop, lo-fi, and especially French disco house producers. They tend to do that a lot because it offers a great way to add some energy and I suppose some anticipation to the music. But one thing is, you've got to be really careful how and when you apply it, because a key change can sound incredibly cheesy if you use it at the wrong time. Now, generally speaking, key modulation occurs in one or two places in a track. Either put it in at your verse when you're changing over to your chorus, or you put it at the end of a breakdown. Now, it's basically points when you want to add that extra energy to the music. I mean, in pop music, if they move from the verse to the chorus, they may change key there. But in dance music, you find it's generally at the end of a breakdown, when everything's about to come back in, you change to a key. Now, you can apply that in one of two ways. You can slowly introduce the key change, or you can bring it in abruptly. With dance music, it's usual to bring it in abruptly, as I just mentioned at the end of a breakdown, to bring in that energetic feel, to add more an energy rush to the music. As soon as the breakdown ends and it all comes back in your mix, that's when you change key. But I am going to talk you through both, how to bring it in slowly and how to bring it in quickly, just in case you want to try them out. Now, the abrupt change shouldn't really require much of an explanation, really. You generally run the track in one key all the way through until the end of the breakdown, and when the music jumps back in, you've come back in a different key. Now, if you decide to do this, I found that the best place to do it is on the V to the I. Play the dominant chord of your original key, and instead of resolving to the tonic, resolve to the tonic of your new key. Now, if you listen carefully to the track that was played at the introduction, that's exactly what I do. When you have the breakdown of the chords and the music comes back in, I do it where the V changes to the I. Now, sometimes when you do that, it doesn't quite work and it sounds a bit too abrupt. If it does, try turning the V chord into a seventh. Now, as you've seen, that makes the dominant that bit more powerful, but it also gives you another note in there which may share some similarities with the key you want to move into. And if it doesn't, you can always try an inversion on the V chord to try and make that movement sound that bit more natural to the tonic of your new key. I mean, saying that, you can always get a smooth transition basically by ensuring that the leading tone of the dominant is a semitone below the tonic of a semitone above, the tonic of the new key. Now, if you want to move to a key a little more slowly than that and ease the transition, you can do that through the use of basically what we've discussed here, secondary dominant chords. Now, I don't think I really need to explain this one too much either. All you need to do is choose your new key and then create a secondary dominant chord to ease that transition over to your new key. Now, when you use a secondary dominant chord like that, it becomes known as a modulating or a pivot chord. Basically, what it is it's a chord that's shared by the key you're in now and the key you want to move to. For example, say you're in the key of D and you want to move to A. Now, you could play the tonic of the D scale and then move to an E. But if you make this E a seventh and then play the A chord in your new key, it will slowly ease the transition between them. Now, generally, when you move key, ideally move up, not down. If you move down, you'll pull the energy of this song down. Now, that's okay for trip hop, but generally for the more energetic types, you want to move up. So when you're moving key, don't move down the range, move up in key. Now, I hope that I've given you some ideas on how to play around with chords and add some interest to progression, but as I mentioned at the very beginning of this session, they're just ideas. They're just ideas based around warping music theory. And basically, they're just suggestions to start you on the road to trying out harmonies that will captivate your listeners. But as I've said, you do have to start experimenting and playing around to come up with ideas of your own. For instance, there's nothing stopping you from borrowing a chord from the relative minor or major of the key you're currently writing in. For example, if you're writing in C major, why not borrow a chord from A minor, the relative of C major, just now and again to add that difference. So if you're writing mostly strong to strong to strong, when you go to a weak, borrow a chord from A minor. Alternatively, you could replace some chords with others. Now that's a technique known as substitution. For example, the I chord in major contains the same 2 notes as the VI chord, so you could always substitute the I for a VI, or perhaps the IV with an II, since those 2 contain the same notes as well. It's all about experimentation. All music is a theory, so you've got to experiment on that. Now, on that note, before I let you bang out a lot of chord progressions, there's one more thing I feel we have to discuss when you're building any chord progression, and that's harmonic rhythm and harmonic balance. So what we'll do in the next session, we'll look at exactly how we can use those to finish off and help us write professional progressions.